The day I went back to the house for the final inspection, I knew I wasn't walking into just any old building. It was my home once every crack in the walls, every creak in the floor, and every piece of furniture still inside. It all carried the weight of memories I didn't want to face. And yet, there I was, standing on that porch, the same one I used to come home to after a long shift at the station or an even longer tour overseas. My name's Austin, and for almost 10 years I thought I had it all figured out. Heather and I, we weren't perfect, but we worked. We had a rhythm, 2 kids, stable jobs, a house that felt like it was filled with love. I was a firefighter, you see. A good job, even if it meant I was out all hours of the night. It didn't matter. Heather held it all together when I couldn't be there. Or at least I thought she did. That day, as I walked through the house, it hit me just how much things had changed. The pictures were gone, our wedding photos, the kids' school portraits, the framed beach vacations that dotted the walls. They were all replaced with generic art and new furniture that felt colder, more impersonal. It wasn't my home anymore. Heather was waiting in the living room when I finally came inside. Her long, blonde hair, which I used to run my hands through every night before falling asleep, was curled in perfect waves like she was ready for some fancy dinner party. Except this wasn't a dinner party, and we weren't the kind of couple that dressed up for each other anymore. And then there was Dwayne, sitting casually on the couch like he belonged there. He leaned back, arms spread wide as if claiming the space as his own. He wasn't a stranger to me. Far from it. Dwayne and I served in the military together. He was a part of my past, someone I used to trust with my life. That's why his presence in my house, next to my wife, cut deeper than anything I had ever felt before. "Hey, Austin." Heather's voice was soft, hesitant, like she wasn't sure how I'd react to seeing them together in our old living room. I wanted to laugh, but I held back. Instead, I stayed quiet, crossing the room and running my hand along the kitchen counter where we used to share late-night conversations and quiet moments after the kids went to bed. The tension in the air was thick, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for someone to speak. "You came to talk?" I finally asked, turning toward them. "Or are you just here to rub it in?" Heather shifted uncomfortably, exchanging a glance with Dwayne before she spoke again. We just thought it was time. Time to explain everything, so you can understand." Understand. That's rich. Like I needed an explanation for why my wife had torn our family apart and left me standing in the ruins. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it didn't change a damn thing. Dwayne chimed in, his voice annoyingly calm. "Look, man, none of this was planned. It just happened. Heather and I cut him off. You found your soulmate? Fell in love? You're gonna stand there and tell me this was some grand plan of the universe that you two were meant to be together?" Heather flinched at the venom in my voice. "Austin, please, it's not like that. It just we connected. Connected." I hated that word. It made their betrayal sound so clean, so innocent, like it was some accident of fate that I should just accept and move on from. But I wasn't going to let them off the hook that easily. "You connected while I was out there risking my life. Ha. While I was putting out fires and saving lives, you two were here screwing each other behind my back." Dwayne had the audacity to look uncomfortable, like my words had stung him somehow. "We never wanted to hurt you." "Really? That's comforting." "Thanks for that, Dwayne. I feel so much better now." Heather wiped at her eyes, though I couldn't tell if it was guilt or shame or just plain regret at being caught. "Austin, please. We didn't plan for this. We didn't mean to fall in love." The silence that followed was brutal. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, every second reminding me of just how far things had fallen. This was the same woman who once promised me forever, who I used to dream about growing old with, watching our kids graduate, getting grandkids, the whole thing. And now she was standing there, pleading with me to understand. I didn't say anything for a while. I just stared at them, at the life they had built on the ashes of mine. Heather and Dwayne. Together. It wasn't just an affair. They weren't just playing around. They were serious, living together in my house, my kids living with them. They tried to paint it like some fairy tale romance, like they couldn't help themselves, like it was destiny. But I wasn't buying it. And I sure as hell wasn't ready to forgive them for what they'd done. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice low but sharp. "Everything. And you threw it away for him." Heather's face twisted with emotion. "Austin, it wasn't like that. Our marriage." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't tell me our marriage wasn't working. Don't try to rewrite history now to make yourself feel better. You cheated. You lied. You ripped our family apart. And you're gonna stand there and act like it's all some cosmic mistake." Dwayne cleared his throat, trying to insert himself into the conversation again. "Look, we know this is hard, but we're asking for your understanding. For your forgiveness eventually." Forgiveness. Another word that hung in the air, bitter and suffocating. They really thought I could forgive this. That one day we'd all be able to look back on this and laugh about it over Thanksgiving dinner or something. "You want my forgiveness?" I stepped closer, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "You want me to pretend this didn't wreck my life? My kids' lives? How the hell do you think I'm supposed to just move on from that?" Heather cried harder now, but it didn't matter. No amount of tears was going to fix what they had broken. The funny thing is, I wasn't surprised anymore. Betrayal has a way of hardening you, of making you numb to pain you thought you could never survive. But standing there, in that house that used to be mine, all I could feel was the cold weight of reality pressing down on me. Heather had chosen Dwayne. That was the truth, plain and simple. And nothing they said now was going to change that. I left them standing there, staring after me as I walked out the door. Let them have their explanations, their justifications. I didn't need to hear it. I had my own truth to live with now. After that day, I didn't go back to the house. There wasn't a point. It wasn't home anymore, and I wasn't interested in watching Heather and Dwayne play house in the life I'd built. I knew they'd be there with my kids, acting like some picture-perfect family. Hell, they probably even had a routine now, family dinners, movie nights, maybe even the occasional trip to the zoo. I couldn't stomach it. Not yet. I'd always been a man who liked routine myself. Even before I became a firefighter, my life was all about structure. I'd grown up in a military family. My father was tough, disciplined, and always up before the sun. He taught me early on that hard work and dedication could get you anywhere in life. So that's what I did. I followed in his footsteps, joined the service right after high school, and served for years before I found my way to the fire department. The job was demanding, but it gave me a sense of purpose. It gave me stability, even when everything else was unpredictable. Heather knew that about me from the start. She'd always admired my discipline, my commitment to my work, to our family. At least, that's what she used to say. We met at a friend's barbecue. She was beautiful blonde hair, bright smile, the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. I was drawn to her right away. She wasn't just a pretty face, though. She had this fire inside her, a passion for life that was infectious. We clicked immediately, and before long, we were inseparable. Heather worked in marketing for a big firm downtown. She loved her job, thrived in the high-pressure environment. I'd come home exhausted after a long shift, and she'd still have energy to spare, talking about the latest campaigns she was working on or the clients she'd landed. We were a team, or at least I thought we were. Looking back now, I can see the cracks that were forming. I just didn't want to admit it. We were living in two different worlds. Mine was rigid, structured, filled with danger and the need to protect others. Hers was fast-paced, full of high society events, corporate dinners, and networking parties. We spent a lot of time apart because of it. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal, but over time, the distance between us grew. I started noticing little things. She'd cancel plans at the last minute, saying she had to stay late at the office. She'd come home smelling like expensive cologne, telling me it was from one of her clients who'd given her a hug. Then there were the late-night texts. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, roll over in bed, and find her staring at her phone, her face illuminated by the dim light of the screen. She always had an excuse. Always. There were times when I tried to confront her about it. I wasn't stupid, I knew something was off, but Heather was good at deflecting. She'd smile, kiss me, and brush it all off, telling me I was overthinking things. Work is just crazy right now, she'd say. You know how it is. And for a while, I believed her. I wanted to believe her. We had kids together, a life together. I didn't want to face the idea that it could all be falling apart. Then, Dwayne came back into the picture. He'd been out of the military for a few years by then, living in the same city as us but keeping a low profile. I didn't see him much. Our lives had taken different paths after our service. But when he popped up one day, asking to grab a drink and catch up, I didn't think anything of it. He was an old friend. After all, we had history. Heather seemed happy to see him too. Maybe a little too happy, but I brushed it off at the time. We had dinner together a few times after that, the three of us laughing over old stories from the service, reminiscing about the good old days. Dwayne always had a way of drawing people in. He was charismatic, confident, the kind of guy who could walk into a room and have everyone's attention within minutes. But something felt different this time. There was an undercurrent of something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The way Heather looked at him, the way she laughed a little too hard at his jokes. It was subtle at first, just enough to make me wonder, but not enough to confirm anything. So I let it slide. I trusted them both. That was my mistake. The distance between Heather and me continued to grow. She was spending more and more time out of the house, claiming she had work meetings, late nights at the office, client dinners. I wanted to believe her. I tried to be the supportive husband, the one who didn't question her every move. But there were too many nights when I'd go to bed alone, wondering where she really was, wondering who she was really with. Then, the fight started. They were small at first, disagreements about work, about the kids, about the little things that didn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but they grew. Soon, it felt like we were arguing all the time. And when we weren't fighting, we were barely speaking at all. I'd come home after a long shift and Heather would be gone. Or worse, she'd be there, sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone like I didn't even exist. The silence between us was deafening. One night, after a particularly nasty argument, I asked her straight out if there was someone else. I'll never forget the way she looked at me, her eyes wide, her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, I thought she might confess, that she might finally tell me the truth, but she didn't. She shook her head, whispered, "No, of course not," and went to bed without another word. That should have been my final red flag, but I still didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to admit that the woman Nick's hidden wife built a life with was lying to me. So I buried my doubts, pushed them down deep, and convinced myself that we could work through it, that whatever was going on, we could fix it. I was wrong. So damn wrong. The signs were all there, I just refused to see them. I wanted to believe in Heather, in us, in the life we'd created. But some things can't be fixed, no matter how hard you try. And soon I'd find out just how deep her betrayal really went. Everything unraveled on a cold Thursday evening, one of those nights where the chill seemed to seep into your bones, no matter how many layers you wore. I'd just finished a grueling 48-hour shift at the station, and all I wanted to do was get home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. I pulled into the driveway, headlights cutting through the dim light of early dusk, and that's when I saw it. Heather's car wasn't there. I should have been used to it by then. She'd been gone more often than not lately, always out for some business dinner or last-minute meeting. I'd grown tired of asking, tired of getting the same bullshit answers, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was the growing knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away, but something told me this wasn't just another late night. I stepped inside the house, the silence hitting me like a brick wall. No kids' voices, no TV, no sounds of life. Just nothing. I kicked off my boots, tossed my jacket over the back of a chair, and headed straight for the shower, hoping the hot water would drown out the nagging thoughts circling in my head. But even under the stream of scalding water, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. After I got out, I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts, not even from Heather, which was strange. Usually she'd at least have the courtesy to let me know when she'd be back. I tried to brush it off, but the feeling gnawed at me. Something wasn't right. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at the blank screen of my phone, willing it to ring. The minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. An explanation. A lie. At this point, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. Then, around midnight, the door creaked open. I heard the soft clink of keys hitting the entryway table, the unmistakable sound of heels clicking across the hardwood floor. She was home. Finally. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't plan on confronting her, but I couldn't stop myself. All the anger, all the doubt, it surged to the surface, boiling over before I could rein it in. I marched toward the hallway, and there she was, Heather, dressed to the nines in a black cocktail dress, her makeup still perfect, her hair tousled just enough to look intentional. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening in surprise. "Austin," she said, her voice tight. "You're home early." Early. I shot back, the sarcasm dripping from my words. "It's after midnight. Where the hell have you been?" She blinked, fumbling for an answer. "I told you I had a late dinner with clients." I stepped closer, narrowing the gap between us, my eyes locked on hers. "Who were you really with?" "Heather." Her breath hitched, but she kept her face calm, composed. She was good at that. Too good. "I told you it was work." I could feel the rage building inside me, but I kept my voice steady. "You expect me to believe that, after everything? You've been gone more nights than you've been home. You barely talk to me anymore, barely look at me, and I'm supposed to believe this is all just work." Heather swallowed, her eyes darting toward the stairs. "Austin, please. Can we not do this tonight? I'm tired, and I really don't want to fight." That was the final straw. The way she brushed me off, like I was some annoyance she had to deal with before she could slip into bed and pretend like everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Who is it?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Who the hell are you screwing behind my back?" Heather's face paled, the blood draining from her cheeks. For a split second, I saw the truth flicker in her eyes, a crack in the mask she'd been wearing for months. But then she steeled herself, shaking her head. "Austin, stop. You're being paranoid." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and jagged in the quiet house. "Paranoid? That's what you're going with? After everything? I'm not an idiot, Heather. I know something's going on." She didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. And that's when I knew. I knew it wasn't just in my head. I knew I wasn't imagining the distance, the late nights, the coldness between us. It was real. All of it. "Is it someone from work?" I pressed, my voice low and dangerous now. "Or is it Dwayne?" The moment his name left my lips, Heather flinched, her composure slipping for just a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Enough for me to see the truth. "Dwayne," I whispered, the shock settling into my bones. "It's him, isn't it?" She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The silence was louder than any confession could have been. I took a step back, the realization hitting me like a freight train. Dwayne, my old friend, the guy I'd trusted with my life. The guy I'd invited into my home, into my family. And now, he was the one sleeping with my wife. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long has this been going on?" Heather looked away, biting her lip, her hands wringing together nervously. "Austin, please. How long?" The words came out sharper this time, each one cutting through the air like a knife. She hesitated, then finally spoke. "About a year. A year. A goddamn year." I couldn't breathe. The room started to spin and I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed in, it was all a lie. For an entire year, my wife had been sneaking around behind my back, betraying me with a man I once called a brother. I could feel the bile rising in my throat, my chest tightening with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to break everything in sight. But I didn't. I just stood there, numb, my mind struggling to process what she'd just told me. Why? I finally asked, my voice hoarse. Heather looked at me, her eyes filled with guilt and something else I couldn't quite place. I don't know, she whispered. It just happened. It just happened. I repeated, my hands shaking. You don't just happen to sleep with someone for a year, Heather. This was a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice. And you chose him. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not anymore. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you. Bullshit, I snapped. You knew exactly what you were doing. You didn't just hurt me, Heather. You destroyed us. You destroyed our family. She opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't want to hear it. I couldn't. I turned on my heel and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. As I stood in the driveway, the cold air biting at my skin, I realized that the life I thought I had was over. Heather and I, we were finished. There was no coming back from this, no fixing it. Dwayne had taken everything from me, and Heather had let him. I don't remember driving that night. The world outside the windshield blurred as I sped down the highway, streetlights casting long shadows over the empty road. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, gripping it so tight I thought I might break it. The rage, the disbelief, it was all so overwhelming, like a storm raging inside me with no way out. Dwayne. His name echoed in my mind like a taunt. How could he? How could they? For an entire goddamn year they'd been sneaking around, laughing at me behind my back, and I had invited him into my life, into my home. The betrayal cut deep, deeper than anything I'd ever felt before. It wasn't just Heather who had stabbed me in the back, it was him, too. The man I'd trusted with my life during our time in the military. He was supposed to be a brother to me, someone who had my back no matter what. But instead, he had become the worst kind of enemy, the kind who smiled in your face while stabbing you in the heart. I didn't know where I was going. Part of me wanted to find Dwayne, to beat the living shit out of him, to make him feel just a fraction of the pain I was in. But I knew that wasn't going to solve anything. It wasn't going to fix what they'd broken. Eventually, I pulled into a parking lot at the edge of town, the neon sign of a rundown bar glowing faintly in the distance. It wasn't the kind of place I usually went, but right now I didn't care. I needed to drown out the noise in my head, to forget for just a few hours. The inside of the bar was dimly lit, smelling of stale beer and cheap cigarettes. A few regulars sat at the counter, nursing drinks while a jukebox played some old country song in the background. I walked up to the bar, ordered a double whiskey, and downed it in one go. The burn of the alcohol was a welcome distraction, a temporary relief from the chaos in my mind. I ordered another drink, then another. Time blurred, and soon the edges of my thoughts began to soften, the sharpness of my anger dulling just enough for me to think clearly. But the pain, that wasn't going away. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the wall, wondering how the hell I was supposed to move on from this. How was I supposed to face my kids, to explain to them why their mother and I were splitting up? How could I ever trust anyone again? As the bartender poured me another drink, my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't want to look at it, didn't want to deal with whatever message or missed call it was, but something made me pick it up. It was Heather. She'd called me 5 times. There were also a string of text messages, all of them saying the same thing. Please come back. We need to talk. I'm so sorry, Austin. Please come home. And we just talk? I stared at the messages, my thumb hovering over the screen. For a moment, I considered calling her back, hearing what she had to say. Maybe she had some explanation that would make this all hurt a little less, something that would help me make sense of the mess she'd created. But then I remembered her face when I confronted her earlier that night. The way she hadn't even tried to deny it, the way she had chosen Dwayne, not just once, but over and over again for an entire year. I put my phone back on the counter, ignoring the messages. There was nothing she could say that would change what she'd done. The divorce papers came a few weeks later, but not before Heather did something I never saw coming. She filed for a restraining order. That's right, a goddamn restraining order. As if I was the one who'd been unfaithful, as if I was the one who had caused all of this. I got served the papers at the fire station. No warning, no heads up. Just a cold, hard piece of reality shoved into my hands while my coworkers tried not to stare. It was a precaution, she said. A legal step to protect herself and the kids, she said, but I knew the truth. It was Dwayne's idea. I knew it had to be. He was always a manipulative bastard, always thinking 3 steps ahead. This was his way of making sure I couldn't do anything to fight back. He was covering his tracks, making me look like the bad guy while he got to play house with my wife and kids. The restraining order meant I couldn't come within a certain distance of Heather or the house. I couldn't even pick up my kids from school without going through a mediator. It was humiliating, infuriating. Every time I saw them, Heather and Dwayne, together, I wanted to scream, to hit something, to make them feel the way I did. But I knew better. One wrong move and they'd have me in a courtroom faster than I could blink. The divorce dragged on for months. Heather wanted full custody of the kids, the house, half my pension, everything. She acted like she was the victim in all of this, like I was the one who had torn our family apart. But I didn't care about the house or the money. All I cared about were my kids, Emma and Jacob. They were the only thing keeping me going, the only reason I didn't fall apart completely. But even that wasn't enough to keep Dwayne out of their lives. I'd heard through mutual friends that he was around them all the time now, acting like a second father, taking them to soccer games, helping them with homework, even tucking them into bed at night. It made me sick. My kids, my family, and now they were his. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, when the rage and the heartbreak kept me awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong, wondering how two people I had loved and trusted more than anything could have betrayed me so completely. I started seeing a therapist, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. If I didn't get my anger under control, I risked losing custody of my kids, and that was something I couldn't afford. Not on top of everything else. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I focused on my job, on being the best firefighter I could be, on being there for Emma and Jacob whenever I was allowed to see them. But the weight of what had happened never really left me. It was always there, lurking in the background, a constant reminder of what I had lost. As for Heather and Dwayne, they stayed together. They moved into a new house just outside the city, and from what I heard, they were playing happy family. But I knew the truth. I knew it wasn't going to last. Because once a cheater, always a cheater. Wayne had a history, after all. I found that out later. He'd been sleeping with other women while he was with Heather, to her sister, her cousin, hell, even one of her best friends. He was a serial cheater, a con artist who played the game better than anyone I'd ever met. And Heather? Well, she was just another pawn in his twisted little world. I'd be lying if I said that didn't bring me some small measure of satisfaction. Knowing that eventually she would feel the same betrayal that I did, knowing that one day she would realize the mistake she made. It was 10 years later when I saw her again. Emma was getting married, and for the first time in a long time, we were going to be in the same room. By then, I'd moved on. I'd remarried a woman named Lori. She was everything Heather wasn't: loyal, kind, and honest. She helped me heal, helped me rebuild my life from the ground up. We didn't have kids together, but that was okay. Lori understood me in a way no one else ever had, and for the first time in years, I was happy. But when I saw Heather at Emma's wedding, standing across the room in a sea of familiar faces, it brought everything rushing back. The hurt, the betrayal, the years of pain. She looked older, more tired than I remembered. Wayne wasn't there, of course. They'd split up years ago, just like I knew they would. At some point during the reception, Emma asked me to dance, and that's when it happened. Heather and I, face to face, standing on the edge of the dance floor, caught in a moment neither of us could avoid. She smiled, but it was a sad smile, one filled with regret. "You look good, Austin," she said softly. "So do you," I replied, though I wasn't sure if it was true. There was a long pause, the kind where you could feel all the things left unsaid hanging in the air between us. "I made a lot of mistakes," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. "I know that now." I didn't respond. What could I say? That it was okay. That I forgave her. I wasn't sure I ever truly could, but as I took Lori's hand and led her onto the dance floor, I realized that it didn't matter anymore. Heather was my past. Lori was my future. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. As the night wore on, the wedding reception buzzed with laughter, music, and the kind of love you could only find at a celebration like this. It was a stark contrast to the emotions simmering beneath the surface for me, standing there with Lori, holding her hand, knowing that the woman who had once torn my life apart was just across the room. Emma looked radiant that day. My little girl, all grown up, dancing with her new husband, a smile plastered across her face that was as genuine as the love she shared with him. I was prouder than I ever thought I could be. Despite everything that had happened between Heather and me, despite the years of pain and heartbreak, Emma had turned out well. She had her mother's sharp wit and her father's sense of loyalty, and for that, I was grateful. She was strong in ways I hadn't been at her age. She didn't tolerate lies or betrayal. Maybe that was the silver lining in all of this. She'd seen what deception looked like, and she swore she'd never let it happen in her own life. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness as I watched her. I'd missed out on so much of her growing up, caught in the turmoil of the divorce, the custody battles, and the silent war one waged with Heather from a distance. Dwayne had wormed his way into my kids' lives for a time, but I did everything I could to make sure they knew who their real father was. It wasn't easy, though. No matter how hard I fought to maintain that connection, there were years when the pain and anger overshadowed everything else. It had taken time for Emma and Jacob to understand the full story of what had happened between their mother and me. Time and a lot of patience, but we'd made it through. We'd come out the other side. Lori leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder as we swayed gently to the music. She had a way of calming me, grounding me in the present. Her presence was a reminder that I had rebuilt my life. I'd found love again, real love, the kind that didn't come with conditions or lies. She had been my rock, standing by my side through the darkest times, helping me find my way when I felt lost. "Are you okay?" Lori asked softly, sensing the tension in me. Her brown eyes searched mine, full of understanding, not judgment. I smiled, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. Yeah, I'm okay. Just thinking. She knew what that meant. She didn't press further. That's one of the things I loved about Lori. She didn't pry. She just held me, offering her quiet support. And that was enough. I glanced across the room again, where Heather was sitting alone at one of the tables, nursing a glass of wine. She looked out of place. And not just because Dwayne was long gone from her life. I hadn't expected her to show up alone. From what I'd heard, she hadn't exactly had the best luck in love since their breakup. Apparently, Dwayne's infidelity had caught up with her, just as I knew it would. It was almost poetic justice in a way, but I couldn't even take satisfaction in it. I was beyond that now. At some point in the evening, I knew it was inevitable that we'd have to talk. You don't share 2 kids in a decade of marriage without eventually crossing paths again, especially on a day like this, but I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say to her. What was left after everything? We hadn't exchanged more than a few polite words since the divorce. The last real conversation we'd had was filled with shouting and accusations, and I wasn't interested in rehashing any of that. Not tonight. Eventually, the moment came. I was sitting at a table with Lori, enjoying the quiet, when Heather approached us. Her steps were slow, hesitant, as if she wasn't sure whether she was welcome. And in truth, I wasn't sure either. Hey, Austin, she said softly, her voice laced with uncertainty. I nodded, glancing up at her. Heather. Lori smiled politely, excusing herself to get us both drinks, giving Heather and me a moment alone. That was Lori always knowing when to step back and give space when it was needed. Heather shifted awkwardly, folding her hands in front of her. I didn't want to leave without saying something. I raised an eyebrow, not entirely sure where this was going. Okay, she took a deep breath, her eyes flicking toward the dance floor, where Emma and Jacob were talking with friends. They're happy, aren't they? They are, I agreed. And that's all that matters. There was a long pause, one that felt heavy with all the things neither of us had said over the years. Heather glanced down at her wine glass, fidgeting with the stem. I wanted to apologize, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I blinked, surprised. This was the last thing I expected. An apology after all these years. I know I should have said it a long time ago, she continued, her voice faltering. But I didn't. I couldn't. And I'm sorry, Austin. For everything. For what I did to you, to us, to our family. I was selfish, and I didn't think about the damage I was causing. I thought I was following my heart, but in the end, I was wrong. Her words hung in the air, raw and full of regret. For the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. Not the woman who had betrayed me, but the one who had once promised me forever. I didn't know what to say at first. There was a time when I would have given anything to hear those words, to have her acknowledge the havoc she caused. But now it felt like too little, too late. I appreciate that, I said finally, my voice even. But it's in the past, Heather. We've both moved on. She nodded slowly, looking down at her feet. I know. I wanted you to know that I regret it. All of it. Losing you, losing our family. If I could go back. I held up a hand, stopping her. We can't go back. And honestly, I don't want to. We made our choices. We've both paid the price. Heather looked like she wanted to say more, but instead she just nodded, blinking back tears. You're right. I wanted you to know. I gave her a small, tight smile. I know, and I hope you find peace with it. For your sake, she smiled sadly. You deserve to be happy, Austin. I'm glad you found someone like Lori. She's a good woman. She is, I agreed. And I'm happy. Truly. Heather lingered for a moment longer, as if waiting for something, but I had nothing left to give her. Eventually, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of wedding guests. And just like that, she was gone. I let out a long breath, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized was still there. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was just the realization that I had survived it all, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the years of anger, and come out stronger on the other side. Lori returned to the table, handing me a drink with a knowing smile. How'd it go? I shrugged, taking a sip. It went. She apologized. Wow, Lori said, raising an eyebrow. Didn't see that coming. Me neither. I chuckled softly. But it doesn't change anything. We've moved on. That's all that matters. Lori slipped her hand into mine, squeezing it gently. Damn right we have. We watched the rest of the wedding unfold, dancing together, laughing with friends, and celebrating our daughter's happiness. And in that moment, I realized that life, despite everything, had a funny way of working out. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side stronger, with a woman who truly loved me by my side, and 2 amazing kids who were thriving. Heather was my past, a painful, messy past. But Lori was my future. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally leave the past behind for good.